The Invisible Disabilities Association proudly presents The Invisible No More Show, the podcast that highlights new technologies and conversations that matter for people living with invisible disabilities. Join us on today's show as we speak with Dr. David Singh from Vivos Life.
So Vivos has developed some interesting technology. It's a suite of devices, and this family of devices, what they're actually doing is targeting sleep disordered breathing and specifically sleep apnea. And the way these devices work is they're going to be able to remodel and redevelop the upper airway. And so we know the upper airway is behind the jaws, and so attached to the jaws are the teeth. And so these devices are going to be worn inside the mouth before and during sleep. And the idea is to remodel, redevelop the upper airway and enhance breathing and allow this patient to sleep like a regular person without wearing anything in their mouth for the rest of their life. The common term is sleep apnea, but actually it's part of a broader spectrum. And we'll call that sleep disordered breathing as a kind of overall umbrella term, because it can be very mild or it can be very severe. So let's take the very mild option. Typically in children, it would be upper airway resistance syndrome, UARS. And so there's just a resistance to breathing. Maybe the nose is blocked, the nose obstructed, maybe this child is mouth breathing. Typically that's how they present. Now if that's left untreated, that patient can have snoring classically, and that snoring can lead to mild sleep apnea. So let's say you've got a younger patient here, and they may have some snoring issues, they may have a mild sleep apnea, but what happens over a period of time, particularly if that patient gets heavier, puts on a bit of weight, and if they become obese, suddenly that mild sleep apnea becomes moderate or even severe sleep apnea. And so here we have a spectrum of disorders. And so what we want to do is, number one is screening to say that, are you at risk? Number two, if you are at risk, let's do a test to find out, are you mild, are you moderate, is it severe? And once we know the diagnosis there, we can start to address the underlying condition. Now, the interesting thing about sleep apnea is that it has comorbidities. Left untreated, what we know now is that things like hypertension, diabetes, cardiovascular problems, stroke, dementia, you can go on and on. There's a whole bunch of chronic diseases which are thoroughly associated with sleep apnea. So if you can address the underlying sleep apnea, those are the conditions may also be addressed, eliminated, and corrected, or at least reduced in severity. So for example, let's take a serious condition like stroke. If you are able to get the sleep apnea under control, maybe if the stroke occurs, it will be less severe, maybe it'll occur at a later date, and if you're lucky, it might be eliminated. And so the neurologists are very interested in looking at the impact of sleep health on, other parts of the body in terms of systemic health. Same with the cardiologists. They're looking at what's the impact of sleep apnea on cardiovascular health, the risks of having a heart attack if this sleep apnea is not addressed early on. These devices that we have are really trying to target the stem cells and change the structure and the form, of the face and the jaws. And those changes can be described as being epigenetic. So what we know is that the genes that you inherit, the genes that you were born with, the genes that you keep for life, are going to give you, facial structure and facial tissues. But the interesting thing is, by using an epigenetic approach, we can start to modify those structures. And so without using drugs, without using surgery, here we are able to get these variations in the phenotype. So let's say you had a narrow jaw, that's a phenotype, and we get able to expand that jaw, make it broader. Now we just change the phenotype, we've got phenotypic variation. And the way we've done that is through an epigenetic response. So the human genome has been sequenced. We've known that since 2003. But what we realize now is surrounding those genes is another layer, which is the epigenome. And so what we're able to do is use signals from the environment, and those could be physical signals, or they could be part of the diet, to produce an epigenetic response And what that actually does, it changes the outcome. It enhances the outcome. And so part of this approach is a little bit like reaching your genetic potential, being the best version of yourself. You know, this is quite an important, significant approach to take. The reason is because in the modern society, we have a high healthcare cost. We have a lot of people who are suffering from chronic conditions. Some of these conditions are actually new in terms of human history. Let's take multiple sclerosis, let's take Parkinson's, for examples. These conditions, you know, they weren't prevalent, you know, hundreds of years ago. And so the importance of the approach here is that let's see if we can target some of these modern and common diseases, but we're going to take an indirect approach. The indirect approach is based on the fact that we want to have a healthy airway, get these patients breathing through their nose, and allow them to sleep like regular people. And so the importance of this is that other chronic conditions, diabetes, we mentioned multiple sclerosis, obesity, we can go on and on in terms of, you know, hypertension, cardiovascular disease, strokes. All of these are related to airway and sleep health. And so it's very important for us to saying, let's get on the first level, you know, on the ground level, and really give the body a firm foundation for health and longevity. So this is why it's so important for us to say, let's get down to the root causes of these conditions, because yes, I can treat hypertension with drugs, but that will be for the rest of your life. Is it possible for us to address the underlying sleep and breathing so the reliance on drugs for hypertension is reduced, and if we're lucky, maybe it will be eliminated? And again, it depends on a case-by-case basis for us to do that. So to my mind, this is why it's important to take that approach. Vivos is kind of unique because it's a company which has a very forward-thinking philosophy, thinking here's where we're at now and here's the vision of where we want to be in the future. And so Vivos is on a very important mission because what they've done is looked at how did we arrive at this common modern level of health. Okay, and so what we know from the literature is some of the children who are being born now are less healthy than the previous generation. What we also know is the lifespan is slightly shorter now than it was a generation ago. So in a way, human health is going in the wrong direction. And so Vivos realized that what we did in the past has precipitated what we have now. And you know, the mission is to saying, let's see if we can prevent this from worsening in the future. And our mission is to saying, let's see how we can improve human health in the future. And so that's what makes kind of Vivos unique in their approach. It's the vision that they have of eradicating a disease which we feel is within our grasp. You know, it's the technology is there. Of course, studies will go on to show all the details that are involved. But Vivos has this vision of actually taking this disease process and trying to eliminate it or reducing it down to a very manageable level. The question is, has this ever been done before in history? And the answer is yes. It's down to the scientific approach. It's down to the evidence that we found. And we can test and improve the protocol. But the example I would give you is vaccinations, or that kind of idea of preventing a disease, and so it doesn't reoccur, you know. And so there are examples where we've taken conditions that were afflictions on humans in the past, and which now no longer exist, or they have been minimized. And so Vivos has the approach of saying, okay, let's take airway, breathing, sleep disorder breathing, and let's see if we can control it, eliminate it, reduce it down to very manageable levels. And that's the philosophy that they're taking. That's the mission that they're on. They have this broad worldwide vision. And, you know, the people who are working with Vivos, they are experts at what they do. They are passionate about what they do. And they want to share that passion with people that they know and they meet, and spread out, you know, the message that there's hope for people who have these kind of airway and breathing and sleeping issues. The interesting thing about the Vivo system is that it's not really restricted by age. And the reason for that is that we're really targeting a epigenetic mechanism. And so the genes that you're born with is the genes that you're going to keep, and we're going to try to see if we can work with that mechanism. So the devices can be worn by someone as young as, let's say, 3 or 4 years old. And they have been worn by people who are in their 60s, 70s, and even 80s. So, the fact is that you have these stem cells throughout the body, and if we can target those, then we can get some responses and some changes. And so, the early studies that we did, these were in newborn babies. And so these were children who were born with, facial defects. But now these devices are designed to be actually worn within the mouth. And so we need teeth, and so healthy teeth and healthy gums. And so typically a child of the age of about 3, 4, 5, they can start to wear these devices. They're not comfortable, they're not uncomfortable to wear, they're quite comfortable to wear. And they don't need to be worn 24/7. You can take the device out. Now that protocol, that approach is called biomimetics. And so we're going to mimic nature. So these really are biomimetic devices. So we're going to tend to copy and replicate the way the body normally grows and develops. And what we know is that what the genes give us is a blueprint. The blueprint saying you're going to have a symmetrical face with 32 teeth. And so the idea with these devices is to see, can we replicate that natural model that we've inherited? Because that natural model gives you, good function, keeps you healthy. And so that's part of the philosophy of the Vivo system.